Welcome back to part 2 of Scooter's Urn here on the Whiskey River Wood Shop. And thank you for tuning in. Well, the cross routing always can look a little hairy when things get close as it's going, but for the bottom piece, I rather like that. I think that came out nicely. However, I'm going to do a little eyeball comparison here and see if, okay, we're taking off 3/8 said and done, and I get up here and I measure 3/8, and that's going to be pretty much right to the edge of the one, but it'll clear, it'll look nice. And now I want to back that off. Back that off to guarantee I ride on that bearing. Okay, tighten those back up. And now we're just going to make another pass just to see if we can take some of those burn marks off and such. Alright, so with the bottom piece OG'd, we're good there. We're going to move on to do the top. Now I'm going to look and see what I have in my super cheap collection of bits. I got a round over and a cove, but I don't have a smaller OG. So we are definitely going to make do with what we have. I'm going to readjust this so I'm not riding on the bearing. I want to short it by 1/8 of an inch. And get the fence so I'm just clearing. All good. So we want to do that side first. That came out okay, nothing too close. So now we can adjust this so that the piece rides on the bearing on the next pass. Right there. And we can back that side off to make sure it clears. Make sure it's tight. So I know somebody's going to ask about this fibrous wispy stuff. Well, I got the bottom of the bit set just high enough that it's not quite taken every bit of it. That will clean up nicely with a little bit of sanding, which we have to do anyway. So as long as we can keep it flat, it won't impede our cutting. I ended up with one little piece of blowout up there that's just a little taller than I wanted it to be. And it looks like it did the same thing on the bottom side. That's too bad. It really is. So we're just going to have to, when it comes time to do some sanding, we're going to roll that edge over just a little bit and soften it a whole bunch so we can hide that. And I'll tell you what, anybody that's a woodworker that tells you they never have to use some sanding or adjustments of their design to hide things that the wood decides to do that we don't intend it to do, yeah, they're lying to you. Adjustment is just part of how it all works. But that's okay, because then, you know, each piece ends up ever so slightly different, and, you know, that's why they call it custom, right? So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to try to take some of that flange off with a straight cutting bit so that this just sets inside the bottom of that box we have gluing up. I'm going to do it by just sheer measurement, and then we'll take it inside and test it out with the piece that's drying in the clamps. So let's get this set up. Now we've got that changed, we're going to take a measurement of the depth of this. It looks like right about 1/8. So we're going to, well, it's hard to measure these things because that plastic bugger tends to eat away. If I hold that, okay. You know what? An easier way to do this. We're just going to hold the piece of wood up to it. Now we'll measure the width of the piece. We're coming in at 5 5/16, and we know that the inside of our box is 3 1/2. So I've actually got to take off quite a bit. I don't know if I like the idea of taking that much wood off this design. Too much potential for trouble. I think as long as people pay attention when they're putting the screws back and forth, that profile will look nice, and we'll just work on the bottom. Alright, so now I need to change the bit again, so we can put a bit to create a cove down in the bottom, just about 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to take a look at what cove bits we got and change into the bit. So as it turns out, I don't have a 1/4 inch ball nose bit. So I might be stuck using that one. But I really don't like how it goes together. I don't like to have to take a pair of pliers to get tools apart. But that might be the only option. If I can get back into them. So I have kind of a limited selection. You know, I got this wonderful selection at Old Menards because, you know, it didn't cost much. If it didn't take me an hour and a half to make a trip to town, maybe I'd go remedy that before I do this, but we're just going to kind of run it in there till it's snug, put it in there till it's snug, and hopefully everything will just stay right where we put it, and we don't end up with stuff flying all over the place. Now we're going to essentially just play tic-tac-toe with the back of this. Hopefully we can keep any blow up from getting crazy, and then we'll clear out the middle of it with that flat bit that I had in there a minute ago. All right, we'll clear up the rest of this with the flat cut bit, and that'll be about that. Remember what I was telling you about these things getting stuck? Yeah, it's really stuck. All right, 15 minutes of screwing around later, I got the thing out. Look through everything, you know, you only really get one chance to get that cut the first time going. And it's really hard to put that wood back on there. Well, I'm not saying it can't be done, but it ain't never gonna be the same. So let's talk about what just happened there for a minute. So this fence wasn't quite clamped down on the back end. Now fortunately I wasn't using a larger bit or in a different configuration that could have caused me to get my finger in there and to deflect it in a direction that's not really going to impact the overall design. But when mistakes happen that take fingers, that's how fast they happen. You know, some people will say, better to be lucky than good. And most of the time, I agree with them. Now, of course, the bottoms, it's coming out okay. There's going to be a bit of sanding to be done when we're done, but that's always the way this seems to work. But now the stuff in the middle, since we got some room to give, we could take the rest of that out just working freehand. So I'm just taking my fence assembly off completely. There, with that out of the way, and I know this machine isn't top line by any means, but does what I need it to do. And if it does what you need it to do, then all good, right? we go. So we got our feet, little sanding, that'll look nice. The screws will be inset here far enough, and I'll put a little countersink on them, so unless you tip it upside down, the feet aren't going to be visible at all. And this will make a nice base. Our glue is dried. So next up I'm going to do a bunch of sanding, and I'm going to start off with all the gravel. Get finer as we go. Clean up all around the top and the bottom and the edges, and we'll see if we need to use any filler, and if we do, I'll show you a good way to make some filler. I'm going to clean up where there's little bits of blowout on these, and when I sand down those little bits of chip out, I want to make sure I mimic that style of sanding on all the other edges, so that they appear symmetrical, so it looks like it's with intention. And at that point, it is with intention. Well, as you can see, sanding is without a doubt the most time-consuming, labor-intensive part of any of it. But without the sanding, it looks like crap. So, we gotta sand. With sanding done, I've noticed that my bevels didn't quite come together all the way. I think my clamping pressure was just a little insufficient. I was hoping on something so small my band clamps would suffice with the push. I think next time I'll have to glue some cauls on here so I can get proper clamps on the corners and really bring it together the way it should be. Anyway, I'm going to probably put together some filler, and we're going to see if we can't get them miters to look just right. So the fine art of making wood filler is to go pick you up one of these $15, $20 wood filler makers. If you take the wife's wood filler maker, then you're probably going to end up having to buy her a new wood filler maker. This one happens to be made by Mr. Coffee, but I'm sure the brand doesn't matter a whole lot. You take whatever sawdust you have laying around off your tools that you're pretty sure is from the same creature as what you're making your project out of, and then just hold the button down for way too long. When everything is said and done, you come out with a real nice fine powder. You can't see it. Let me see if I can get close enough for you. Okay. Real nice fine powder. And then you just mix that with some wood glue and put it in what you're trying to fill. When the glue dries, you're all done, and your wood's going to match your project with any luck. Pretty close. It depends how much other wood you have laying on the floor when you pick up your sawdust. So when you make up your wood filler putty, try to find an old box that you can make it on. The coating on it doesn't absorb the glue so well, so it tends to not want to dry out while you're mixing it. Grab some of your Titebond wood glue and some powder and just make up a putty with it. try to get a thickness that's thicker than pancake batter, maybe something along the line of soft clay-ish, and then take your piece and just work it from one side to the other and force it with your fingers kind of down into whatever grooves you think you need filling. And then let it sit around and dry. Won't take too long. After I've put the putty on, I kind of hand sand it with a paper towel, and it knocks most of the excess off and helps it dry a little quicker. With our filler in place, now we're going to do a little more sanding. Yay, sanding. So our next step is to affix the top. We got out our doweling jig, and we're going to put a couple dowels in the top just to help locate and give it a little extra grab for the glue. I've already set up the depth on the drill, and I have my collet locked in place so I can't drill too far. We're just going to kind of position this offset from center, so there's really no way I can screw up which side I've decided the front is. And we're going to hold that down firmly. And we're going to let the drill do the work. Our dowel will be pretty snug in there once it's time to go in. In fact, I think I might just gently take it out a little bit more. Make sure that dowel's going to go in there snug, but I'm not going to have to beat on it too hard. There we go. And I know this side is the front. It's got the wider, darker patch, which I think looks nice with the rest of the design. Let's put one more on the back side. There we go. Now with those drilled out, now we can use our little locators. That's these little, okay, can't hardly see them. One of those. And we're going to place them down in there where the dowels go. That's going to help us locate where we want them to be. We're not going to apply any pressure yet. Make sure we turn things the same direction. And we are going to get up above it and kind of eyeball left and right. Make sure it looks square, even on about all sides. This is something that you can take a little time doing. I know it'd be nice to say we could just grab a ruler and make it perfect, but sometimes measuring by the 32nd, and when you're doing woodworking, it's easier to just make it look right by eye. Where does it seem to just want to sit? And that's its place, and I'm going to push. Now, these wonderful little locators have put dents where the center of my hole is to go, and on the end of the bit there's a little, I don't know if you can see that, a little spot right on the, something to light to see where you can, there we go, you can see that pin. That'll drop right into those little detents. Okay, we'll take those out in a minute. I might have to get a needle nose, get a hold of them. Now, we know we don't want to drill down in too far, so we're like really going to move this little locking collet. I know I only want to drill down in about a 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. So right about there, if things don't move too much by the time I get this locked in. We can measure again. That'll put us right at about 1/4 of an inch, which is 3/8 to the end of that point, which is safe, so we're not going to come through and get into the carving that we did on the other side. So now I'm just going to see if I can adjust this and just kind of get it where we want it to be. Right about there. Now we don't want this to do anything but keep the bit upright. I want that, well, you know what, we already moved our little collet. So we're not drilling in very far, let's just freehand it. We know we've got our spot. I can kind of get back here and take a look at it. If I'm worried, I can grab a speed square and just kind of hold it up there to see that I'm straight. And there we go. We can test those out a little bit with a little glue and give them a little love tap. They'll socket together just fine. And these need to come out, so I'm going to go get these out, put the doweling jig away, and go back inside to the dungeon and get this glued up. We've got the box glued up, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the dowels that I set into there on the front and back. When putting in dowels, always make sure that you drill the hole just a little bit deeper than it needs to be, because there's always going to be something preventing that dowel from sinking all the way down in. Whether it's extra glue, a little bit of air, or a piece of sawdust, something. If you don't, you might find yourself with a utility knife whittling down the end of a dowel to make sure that your pieces fit together nice and snug. So with that being said, I'm going to do a little more sanding on this just to get rid of some clamping marks and a little bit of glue that was left. Make it look nice, and then we're going to work on the holes to screw the base on. So now we're going to fasten the base onto the box. We're going to use 1.5" screws. I like to use a T25 bit because you get a better grab on it. Stripped out Phillips head screws are a pain for everyone, so I try to just avoid using them all the time. And this isn't probably going to be something that's going to be opened and closed a lot. It's probably going to be done one time, and that'll be the end of that. So we know that our overhang of this piece to this piece is 1/2 inch, and we know that our board is 3/4 of an inch thick. So we want the center of our screw to be 7/8 of an inch and in from the end. We're going to put one on each side and pre-drill the holes, and then we're going to do some marking, which after drilling the holes in the top, I'm going to use a small bit, if you can see it, and I'm just going to put that down there and give it a twist with my fingers just to mark where that first screw goes in. That way I can pre-drill down into there just a little bit, and we can get our first screw installed, and then it'll give with a little wiggle so that we can rotate this to fit just so on the piece. Once we get it right where we need it, then we'll snug that first screw up, drill the one on the other side completely, install that screw, and then we can get the other two in. And there we have it. The box is assembled. Now that I know everything fits together just right, I'm going to take those screws back out and we're going to bring it inside for finishing. So now we're going to finish the piece. We want a very simple, natural finish on it, which is why I use Howard Feed and Wax Wood Polish and Conditioner. It's beeswax and orange oil, and it does a wonderful job bringing out the color of the wood, giving it a little bit of protection, and not leaving any kind of really caked on finish. The wood looks very natural when it's done, but still brings out the beauty of the wood itself. You pick it up at Menards. I don't know. Personally, I love the stuff. It's cheap. Well, tentatively, $10 a bottle. That ain't bad. Stuff lasts a long time. Howard is not paying me to say this. I just choose that product. Initially, I apply it with a simple plastic brush that can be used over and over and over again if all you're using it for is that. And you just kind of cake it on and then let it sit 15-20 minutes and wipe it down. Also, I always do the hidden and or bottom sides first when I apply this, just to minimize any inconsistencies. Oh, and I hope you like my finishing area. It's just the dining table in the house. So you never have to worry about any altercation of color with this stuff. It doesn't really matter how you put it on, just so long as that coat goes on pretty thick. So there's plenty for the wood to absorb. The end grain areas are going to absorb more than the flat or side grain areas, and then you're going to wipe off the excess in a few minutes anyway. But yeah, I could come back, you know, a week from now, have to sand something on this piece or modify it, and when I'm done, I could just Slap on another coat of this and you wouldn't see any difference in color because all it's doing is accentuating the natural color of the wood the way it is. And there's no solvents in it. It smells like orange oil. It's really pretty easy to work with, straightforward stuff. So part of the reason that I use a brush to apply this is because so many of the projects that I do have carvings in them, and the bristles get down into the carvings much better than using a rag or a towel or some other thing. Without the bristles, you can really get it caked up in there, which just makes it that much more trouble when it comes time to wipe it down and get rid of the excess. So at least in the carving parts, I try not to get big goopy spots, so I can kind of just work it through. And there we have it. The coat's on. I'll let it sit for a while, come back, wipe it down. So that was our finished product. I think they'll be happy with it. If you're happy with it and you're interested in such a product, you can find a link below to have us make one just for you. Of course, it won't say scooter and have that writing on the top. You can pick whatever writing you want. Just see the link below. And keep in mind that this first project was a simple one. The projects will build in complexity over time. And eventually we're going to get to some really amazing stuff that I got in the works for probably 3-4 projects down the road. But the next one will be a fun one too. Not terribly different, but definitely more interest in angles. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you were entertained. If you got something to say, you can leave it in the comments below. We're always looking for some kind of feedback. All criticism is constructive at this point. Please do like and subscribe, help us build the channel, and we can come up with amazing content for the future. And a sincere thank you from the Whiskey River Woodshop.